Dear colleagues, I declare open the plenary sitting of the 2020 annual session of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Welcome to all of you, and a special word of welcome to NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who will join me on screen in a moment. The key theme for our sitting today will be how NATO adapts to remain a political, military, transatlantic alliance, unsurpassed today and in the future. 1 year ago, at their December meeting in London, Allied leaders decided to launch a reflection process on ways to strengthen NATO further. Of course, they did not know then that this process would coincide with the most serious, profound and wide-ranging crisis which our societies and economies have known in decades. COVID-19 has taught us important lessons about our ability to sustain major global shocks as societies and as an international community. This pandemic has also confirmed that our nations must learn to better confront a number of new dynamics and new challenges. Among these are the rise of China and our dependence on Beijing in strategic sectors and the need to better counter disinformation and propaganda. For all these reasons, COVID-19 is a security issue. But of course, the security challenges which predated the pandemic have not disappeared. To the contrary, first among these are Russia's aggressive actions, terrorism, instability in our neighborhood, hybrid and cyber threats, and emerging and disruptive technologies. NATO 2030 offers a timely and important opportunity to ensure NATO is prepared to deal with these challenges and any further ones, and to learn the lesson from the COVID-19 pandemic. A key pillar of this alliance is remarkable commitment to collective defense, NATO's defining principle enshrined in the Article 5. Allies must continue to demonstrate this commitment in words and in deeds. In this, the alliance should not overreach, but it must address the entire range of complex and diverse threats at the 360 degrees. To back up this commitment, we must continue to maintain defense spending and investment in innovation and technology, despite the increased pressure on public budgets in the wake of the pandemic. But we must also work harder to achieve a fair sharing of the burdens and responsibilities for defense. This is essential for NATO's ability to address today's complex threat environment. But it is also essential for transatlantic unity and solidarity. The bond uniting Europe and North America is unique. It is the wellspring of NATO's unmatched political and military strengths, and we cannot let it weaken. Similarly, our values must remain our compass. We must protect them and resolutely counter those who seek to undermine the democratic foundations of our societies and institutions. We must also do more to protect rules-based international order, working with like-minded partners from Europe to Asia. This order is threatened by many factors. Russia, of course, and its many ongoing violations of international law, but also China and its attempt to impose its own vision and values. Let me be clear. China must act as a responsible global player. We can no longer afford to be naive about its ambitions and role. Recommitting NATO to shared values is also a prerequisite for strengthening the political dimension within NATO. Allies must consult more and better. This will increase predictability among alliances, foster a better understanding of allies' national interests and policies, and promote a greater convergence of interests and strategic priorities. Allies must also make decisions faster and streamline their decision-making processes while preserving the fundamental principle of consensus. The diversity of today's threats and the multipolar world make it more difficult for many citizens to understand NATO's mission and contribution to security. Yet, public support is an indispensable element of NATO's strength and credibility. We must strengthen communication and public diplomacy to explain how NATO delivers security for citizens. And we must back it up with the necessary resources. Our Assembly is particularly well placed to support key elements of this vision, whether it is about enhanced political consultation, dedicating ourselves to our shared values, maintaining public support. Maintaining public support for NATO, keeping up efforts on defense spending and innovation, or broadening NATO's network of partners. We complement and amplify NATO's action in ways no other organization can. Therefore, I want to thank NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg for recognizing our Assembly as a key stakeholder in the NATO 2030 and reiterate our commitment to support this process as best we can. Later this afternoon, I will present a draft declaration which includes a number of recommendations on NATO 2030. This text draws much of its inspiration from the contributions which Assembly delegations have submitted over the summer and early autumn. I therefore sincerely hope you will be able to support it. But let me stop here for now and formally welcome Mr. Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of NATO and Chairman of the North Atlantic Council. Jens, please join me on screen. Mr. Stoltenberg, thank you for attending this first ever online session of NATO Parliamentary Assembly. And now I would like to give the floor to you. Please, Mr. General Secretary.
Thank you so much, President Mr. Hasi, dear Attila, and thank you for your leadership of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly in this very difficult period. I have really enjoyed working with you, and I appreciate also the many phone calls we have had during your tenure as the President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Honourable members, dear friends and colleagues, it is a pleasure to be with you all again. I last addressed your annual session a year ago in London. Since then, COVID-19 has changed our lives in ways we could barely have imagined. None of the countries and communities you represent have been left untouched. NATO allies and our militaries have been supporting each other, our partners, throughout these pandemics. Transporting critical medical supplies, patients and experts, setting up military field hospitals and securing borders, supporting civilian efforts and helping to save lives. As we now face the next wave, NATO has established a stockpile of medical supplies in Italy. It's already being used to provide for allies in need. Just in the last few weeks, we have distributed hundreds of extra ventilators to our allies in Albania, the Czech Republic, Montenegro and North Macedonia. And we are ready to provide further assistance. At the same time, we remain vigilant and ready, because NATO's main responsibility is to make sure this health crisis does not become a security crisis. Our military readiness has been upheld, and our missions and operations continue. From our battle groups in the east of the alliance to Kosovo, Afghanistan and Iraq. This is NATO adaptation at its best. And this is what I want to talk to you about today. How NATO can continue to evolve in the face of an ever more uncertain world. Last December, NATO leaders asked me to lead a forward-looking reflection, to future-proof our alliance. And that is why I launched NATO 2030, to make our strong alliance even stronger and fit to face any challenge in the next decade and beyond. My priorities for NATO 2030 are to ensure NATO remains a strong military alliance, becomes stronger politically, and takes a more global approach. Let me go briefly through each of them. First, we already are a strong military alliance. In fact, in recent years, we have had the biggest increase in our collective defense for a generation, with more investment, modern capabilities, and higher readiness of our forces. This must continue. I know that prioritizing defense spending in the middle of a health crisis is not easy. But the threats that existed before the pandemic have not diminished. On the contrary. So the commitment we all have made to invest more in defense is as relevant as ever. One of the reasons we need a strong military is for our fight against international terrorism, as we have been doing in Afghanistan for almost 20 years. As you know, the United States has announced that it will reduce its presence in Afghanistan. But the NATO mission will remain, and we will continue to provide support to Afghan security forces. No ally wants to stay in Afghanistan for longer than is necessary. But we cannot risk Afghanistan becoming once more a platform for international terrorists to plan and organize attacks on our homelands. And we cannot let ISIS rebuild in Afghanistan the terror caliphate it lost in Syria and Iraq. Therefore, we will address NATO's future presence in Afghanistan at our next defense ministers meeting in February. We will be faced with a difficult choice. Either stay and pay the price of a continued military engagement, or leave and risk that the gains we have made are lost and that the peace process falters. This is not the time to conclude, but we have to remember that we went into Afghanistan together, and when the time is right, we should leave together in an orderly and coordinated way. The second priority of NATO 2030 is to strengthen NATO as a political alliance. NATO is the only place where countries of Europe and North America meet every day. We need to build on this and use NATO even more as a forum for frank discussion on a wide range of security issues. From Russia to the Middle East, and from the security impacts of a rising China to climate change and arms control, as well as how we deal with the new and disruptive technologies. For NATO to become stronger politically, we must continue to acknowledge that yes, we have our differences. We have had them in the past and we have them now. We must continue to address any differences frankly as allies and as friends. This is what we have been doing, for instance, in the Eastern Mediterranean. NATO provided a platform for Greece and Turkey to come together on the basis of international law and allied solidarity, to establish a military deconfliction mechanism and to cancel some planned military exercises. This type of military deconfliction can prevent dangerous incidents and accidents in the Eastern Mediterranean, and it can create the opportunity for political discussions and diplomatic solutions to address underlying disputes. Even in the most heated debate, we should not forget that what unites us is stronger than what divides us. That ultimately, we are NATO allies, committed to our core mission to protect and defend one another, and committed to our core values: democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. Our voice is more powerful when we stand united. The third priority of NATO 2030 is to take a more global approach. We are a regional alliance and we will remain a regional alliance. But the challenges we face are increasingly global. Terrorism, cyber threats, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, pandemics and disinformation campaigns. None of our countries, even the biggest ones, can deal with such challenges alone. This is also true of our approach to China. China is not our enemy, but its rise is fundamentally shifting the global balance of power, bringing many opportunities, especially for our economies, but also challenges to our security and our technological edge, increasing the pressure on our values and our way of life, and multiplying the threats to open societies and individual freedoms. So the rise of China requires our continued collective attention to fully understand what it means for our security and to act accordingly, including by boosting the resilience of all our nations and by working even more closely with like-minded countries and with organizations like the European Union, to defend the global rules and institutions that have kept us safe for decades. I welcome the active contribution of NATO Parliamentary Assembly to NATO 2030, including through the survey of your members you conducted over the summer, your written report and discussions with the expert group, the lively debate you had last month with the Deputy Secretary General, and the reports and resolutions to be adopted later at this annual session. Your input will feed into my recommendations for NATO leaders when they meet next year. I'm also consulting with youth leaders, civil society, industry, and of course with allied capitals. All of you in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly play a crucial role in preparing NATO for the future as we look to 2030 and beyond. You ensure we stay safe militarily by deciding our defense budgets. You make us stronger politically by upholding our values, debating our differences, and keeping our democracy strong. And you help us take a more global approach by bringing together well over 300 parliamentarians from all NATO allies, associated countries, and observer delegations. So thank you for your many different contributions and for your continued support for NATO. I look forward to your comments and to your questions.